Hey everybody, this is Mr. Mama coming at you with another APGov video. This one's going to be focusing in on topic 4.10 entitled Ideology and Social Policy. Now, remember, when we talk about policy, public policy, it's the actions of government to try to solve problems that exist in society. Now, these could be matters of foreign policy, it could be matters of economic policy, but today we're taking a look at what we would consider to be social policy or social welfare policy. And, the basis for this being a priority of the government, in many respects, is connected to the Constitution's preamble unto itself, where it says that, one of the, responsibilities of the federal government is to, quote, promote the general welfare. Now, note, that's a, pretty broad phrase, but it's generally meant to, talk about the idea of working to try to make sure that people are able to enjoy quality lives. And traditionally that has been a problem for many millions of Americans. So a lot of these policies we're looking at are trying to address issues in terms of avoiding poverty, avoiding illness, things like that, to once again try to be able to have a better overall quality of life. Many of these welfare programs are designed to be a quote-unquote social safety net. And the idea being is, making sure that the government creates policies that are going to be protecting people. If they do fall upon hard times, if they do lose their job, if they become, too old to work for themselves, that there's this safety net to catch people in terms of making sure they do not, fall into the abyss. Now, when we do talk about, these social welfare policies, what we're going to be talking about are big programs. Now note, these programs that we're going to be looking at, these are programs that are so big for the most part, so big and so well established that they have become accepted by just about every mainstream liberal and conservative. Now note, there's going to be, extremists on both sides that might have some issues with some of these programs. But really the debate with social welfare policy, as we'll talk about, is not necessarily, should there be Social Security? It's to what degree should it be funded? It's not a matter of, should we have programs for those that are unemployed? It's to what degree should we have those things? The idea of not having any of these things exist at all, to have no real social safety net, that's really only supported more by your kind of hardcore libertarians that have kind of a more of a 19th century mindset to it. But, starting with the New Deal and extending through the Great Society of the 1960s, we have come to believe that you've got to have some sort of government-operated social safety net to try to protect people. Now, as we've said before, in previous lessons, that when we talk about many of these policies, what we're going to be looking at is the use of what we call entitlement programs. Now, you might remember entitlements being mentioned when we talk about the budget. And yes, entitlement programs are the biggest part of the federal budget and growing every day. But understand what that means once again. An entitlement is a program that is designed in such a way that if you qualify for said benefit, the government must provide it. So when we talk about a lot of these programs, such as Social Security and Medicaid and things like that, if you qualify, the government must pay out that benefit. So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, so just kind of keep that in mind. Anyhow, we're going to hit the big ones here, the big programs. Not all the programs. I mean, there's programs like SSI and TAMF and food stamps and the Earned Income Tax Credit. And there's a whole bunch of things that exist out there as social welfare policies that we could go into. But for the purposes of this course, we're just going to hit the big topics, okay? And note, these are the ones that you're most likely to have, a relationship with, to come into contact with. Starting with our first one, the biggest one, Social Security. Basically, unless there are some exemptions, like there's public employees that have exemptions and things like that. But, aside from an unusual exemption, every one of you are going to be relying on Social Security. You're going to be a part of Social Security. I'm not saying you got to like it. I'm not saying that, it's good or bad or whatever, but it is a reality. Social Security, as the name implies, is designed to protect society on a financial level. So how does it work? Well, works like this. Starting, when you are able, when you are a working adult, you will be paying into Social Security. You don't have a choice. It's not an option. The government automatically makes you do this. And it is paid through a tax. That tax is 6.2%. The government takes it right off the top. Now, note, this is in addition to any kind of federal income tax, state income tax, local income tax, anything along those lines. This is an additional 6.2% on your gross income. Now, that is matched by your employer as well. That will also pay 6.2% of what your gross income would be. So it's really a combined, 12.4% of money, so to speak, that is going to be paid equally by you and your employer. Now, note, when we talk about paying into the Social Security tax, there's a limit to it. There's a ceiling to how much income is taxed for Social Security. As you can see here, as of this year, 2022, that Social Security tax is applied to your first $147,000 of annual income. So what that means is that if you make $147,000 a year or less, you're paying that 6.2% on your entire earnings, and that's the vast majority of Americans. But if you are making above that, anything above 147,000, that is not taxable for Social Security. So if you are, say, LeBron James and you made $100 million this year, you've got $147,000 that's taxed by Social Security. But then beyond that, you've got 99 million plus that is not taxed on Social Security. And yes, even LeBron James pays into Social Security. Everybody basically does. Doesn't matter how wealthy you are, doesn't matter how poor you are. If you are earning income, you're paying into Social Security. Now, you're going to be paying into Social Security throughout your working adult life. And as that goes on, money is accrued and accumulated for you for when you would be old enough to receive your benefits. Originally, Social Security was designed to pay full benefits at 65 years of age. But starting in the 1980s, we've seen the laws change to now, most folks now, and for you folks, it's going to be for when you're 67 years old. So there has already been a slight increase in the age at which you can receive full benefits. How much money do you get as a benefit? Well, right now, the average monthly benefit, as you can see here, is a little over $1,500 a month. It could be as much as approximately $3,300 a month. It just is dependent on how much you have paid into Social Security throughout your working life. So, it could be that some folks are making, twice as much as other people. But note, though, if you're the average American that's getting about $1,500 a month in Social Security benefits, you need to be mindful that, from a teenage perspective, maybe $1,500 is a lot of money, but from a senior citizen adult perspective, that's not really a whole lot of money. That's, you're basically talking about, maybe upwards of, $18,000 to $20,000 a year. That is not very much to live on. You might be able to, maybe, pay the very, very basics to survive. But you're not going to really have a great quality of life, even with Social Security. That is why we, always recommend that you want to make sure that you are adding to your retirement on your own with private investments and things like that. You don't want to just rely on Social Security, but, thankfully we do have Social Security because for some people that is all they're ever going to have. Now, Social Security has been responsible for greatly reducing poverty for elderly Americans. Prior to this, the number one, reason for poverty was old age. You couldn't work anymore. So that is a very important thing to have. But unfortunately, Social Security has some intrinsic problems associated with it that have become more and more of an issue as time has gone on, and is going to be something that's very critical for you folks when you do get to this age. Let's kind of take a step back and just kind of set up the routine here for how Social Security was designed. Remember, Social Security was designed in the 1930s as a way to help elderly folks that have worked their entire adult life to have a livable income when they're no longer able to work. This was especially important in the 1930s during the Great Depression, when people that had worked their entire lives, saved money in the banks, lost it all when the stock market collapsed and the Depression took hold. So when Social Security was set up, you might look at it and go, oh, okay, this is going to be started now in the 1930s, and then it will help folks once they get old in the 1970s and 80s, and it'll be great. Well, yeah, but the biggest problem was old folks then and now in the 1930s. How do you keep these folks that have lost everything able to, keep a roof over their heads? So the way this program started out was that money that started to first get paid in by working people in the 1930s, that money might seem on the surface like you are paying into your own personal account. That's not really how it works. You pay it into the government, it goes into the government's general fund, and that money goes right out to people that are collecting the benefits. So what does that really mean? Young people pay in, old people receive the benefits. Money in by the young, money out by the old. Now note, it's not necessarily a bad problem with the assumption that, you pay in when you're young, you'll get it when you're old. You might be paying for your grandparents today, but when you're old, your grandchildren will be paying for you. So it should, so to speak, kind of balance out. However, things have changed since the 1930s. One of the biggest changes since the 1930s is the life expectancy for an American. When Social Security was created in 1935, the average life expectancy for an American was 62, which is kind of interesting considering the full benefits you had to be 65 for in 1935, but that's a whole other issue. But anyway, the average age was 62. Now, today, that average age is right about 80. So you've got folks living 18 years longer on average today than they did when this program was created. Now, also keep in mind that it's not just the people that pay into Social Security that receive the benefit. It's also their spouses that get that. So you might be a guy that, worked your whole life and you lived to be 75 and, you collected benefits for maybe 10 years, but you might have a spouse that is, younger than you, and they might live to be 90, and they might be collecting Social Security for a long, long time. So that's important to keep in mind. Also, an important thing to keep in mind, the biggest generation in American history by numbers, the baby boomers, they have now become the primary beneficiaries of Social Security. In other words, they are now at an age where they are now mostly starting to collect on Social Security, which is an issue. You got more people living longer getting the benefits with fewer people proportionally paying into it. So what does that mean? That means significant problems for the financial solvency of Social Security. If you take a look at this graph here real quick, you can see that, the amount of money going in, has been exceeded by the amount of money that went into it. So we see expenditures have gone up, and for a long time we had reserves. Now, this is actually what I want to kind of focus on real quick here. This graph doesn't show it totally very well, but basically what we had for a long time was more dollars getting paid in than dollars going out. And that's mostly because the baby boomers were paying in for a number of decades. Well, starting in the 1990s, you started to see the script flipped a little bit. You started to see more money going out on an annual basis than coming in. So in other words, Social Security was running a deficit. But it still had, on the whole, what we called a surplus, what we called a reserve. So decades and decades and decades of people paying in more than they were spending on Social Security is going to build up reserves over time. But as you can see here on the graph, after now already about 25 years of deficits annually, now you are seeing the revenues now on the verge of being exceeded by the expenditures in terms of the reserve, not just the revenue, but the reserves as well. So what does this mean? Well, as you can kind of see right here, depending on what economist you want to talk to, Social Security has a very, very uncertain future. As you can see here on this one graph, they estimate Social Security to become what we call insolvent by the year 2035. That's an important deal. For many of you folks, that are juniors right now in 2022, you're going to be in your early 30s in 2035. So this is a very important thing. Now, that being said, when we come back in our next video, we'll take a look at how the government can respond to these challenges. We'll see you next time. Bye.